right. Welcome back to the Home Turf Podcast. My name's Braxton Dore, and I'm joined here by Mathias. Go ahead and introduce yourself. What's your job?
I'm a sports writer here at the battalion, and thanks for having me on. It's fun.
Absolutely. All right. So, haven't had a podcast in a little while. We've been on a little bit of a hiatus. Justin is not feeling well. He won't be here. But we have Texas to cover and Texas to preview as they come here tomorrow. It's Friday currently, but I can't wait. I'm so excited. Mathias will be at the game. He will be covering for us for the battalion, and I can't wait to get started to talk about this game. I mean, I've had a 4-hour drive before this. I'm itching to talk about college football. Itching. Let's go ahead. So just to start off, last time they played was in 2011. It's been a minute since Texas has came, and let's just see. Texas's only top wins have been over Vandy, Kentucky, and Florida. Mathias, just break us down kind of how their season's been, kind of how they're looking going into this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, ever since Sarkisian has taken over as the head coach, they've been really, really good. Especially this, last year they made the college football playoff. They were really good. And then this year they've been the kind of prohibitive favorite in the SEC the entire time. But they haven't really had to play anybody other than Georgia. Georgia's kind of their only major game that they've had. They lost to Florida. They lost to they beat Florida. They beat Vanderbilt, but they, played it pretty close against Kentucky for the most part last week. Like it wasn't a dominant performance. And then against Georgia, they didn't play well at all. Like in the first quarter, the defense of Georgia just dominated the Texas offensive line. They couldn't contain them. So I think it'll be really important for A&M to just try to get out to an early lead because, I mean, we saw what Georgia can do against the Texas offensive line. Absolutely. When they're reeling, when Texas is trying to come back. What
really killed Texas also in that game was definitely the costly turnovers and kind of just not being able to get it done on the offensive side. And I'm really curious on how they look against a better defense like a Georgia defense. And I think A&M is kind of going to be the only real test that you can compare defenses to Georgia. Obviously, Florida doesn't have the best defense, neither does, Kentucky or Vanderbilt. And those are the only notable, wins that Texas has. They've actually only played 6 of the last 7 of the bottom teams in the SEC. I think that's a really notable thing. It's definitely not a easy. I mean, it's not a good schedule. It's one of the last in the SEC, if not the last. And A&M, on the other hand, they played 3 teams in the top half, including, South Carolina, who has made a really big push into this, top half of the SEC, kind of seemingly out of nowhere too. But we do have to talk about A&M's only, SEC losses to South Carolina and then most recently Auburn. So let's just kind of briefly talk about Auburn just for a few seconds. I don't really want to relive it.
Yeah, let's get out of this game.
I know. And it really wasn't – it just started off bad. I think we can both agree. That's the only thing that the Aggies got off to just a really bad start, 14-0 at by the second quarter, and then 21-7 at the half.
Yeah. And
we didn't think it was going to actually be, a score from A&M.
No.
And that one last score at the end of the half, it really gave them life. I think that was the only reason. They actually ended up going into overtime later on. And I don't think we're going to see a play like that, against Texas. It's definitely going to be a deciding thing in the fourth and third quarters. I don't think it's going to go all the way to overtime like it did with Auburn. And I think that's really just kind of how this team has played together. They're never out of it.
No.
They're always trying to get back in the game no matter what. And they have a few, they almost tried to get back in it with against South Carolina. It was the same kind of feeling. They get down off to a really, really bad start in the first half. Can't get much going in the running game because obviously the injury to Le'Veon Moss shakes up the whole offense. And then now going into Auburn, they only had, 167 yards against Auburn, and you really wonder how are they going to get that ground game going? How are they going to perform against, Texas, who, if you don't know, ranks 14th in the country in rushing defense with only 104 yards a game. I really think if they want to do something, they have to – Colin Klein, the offensive coordinator, has to do something with a mix of rushing, maybe getting some option plays in for Marcel so that he can confuse this Texas defense. Mathias, tell me a little bit about this Texas defense. I know we kind of been rushing through it, but kind of break down what you're seeing on their defensive part.
I mean, it's an elite defense. It is absolutely one of the best defenses in the country. And what they do best is they're second in the country in first down defense. So they get you off schedule immediately. They try to make it so that you can't play the game that you're trying to play. A&M's going to come in and they're going to want to run the ball. They're going to want to lean on Amari Daniels. They're going to want to lean on this offensive line that's been really good all season and on Marcel Reed's legs. And Texas is second. I mean, they're second in the country on first down defense. They stop the run really, really well. And A&M does not. They're not going to want to put Marcel Reed into a spot where he's throwing the ball on 3rd and 10, on 3rd and 12. That's just not the recipe for success for this team. You wanted, like, this team, A&M, like, let's face it, they're coming in undermanned. They're not at the same talent level as Texas if you just go player for player. So they're going to want to shorten the game. They're going to want to run the ball. And they're going to want to try to control, like, time of possession. They're going to want to keep that Sark offense on the sidelines and let Kyle Field just kind of equalize and play as a factor where they're just kind of taking control and not letting Texas dictate the flow of the game. So against this defense that has playmakers at all three levels, it's going to be really hard. Like, Colin Klein is going to have to try to manufacture plays that get your play, like, the best playmakers, the playmakers that are remaining on this offense with the injuries, into space and into places where they can really make game-changing plays.
I agree. And I think you had a really good point about how Colin Klein has to basically take away Texas's offense in this game. And we're not talking about Elko's defense taking it away. We're talking about our own offense making sure that they don't get off the field like we saw against Auburn. Because, I mean, I'm not looking at the exact time of possession, but yeah, so we actually we outpossessed Auburn, but I think that's the only reason it actually went close to the wire is because every time Auburn was going out there, I mean,
they were scoring.
They were scoring.
Too. Like, I mean, we saw Coleman and is it Lambert Smith or Lambry Smith?
Yeah, Lambert Smith.
Just like deep posts over the middle. Like, A&M couldn't stop him in the secondary, so A&M has to go out there and respond immediately. And this is a team that they don't have that kind of game-breaking wide receiver talent to blow open a game like that. Like, they have to methodically move the ball down the field. So against this Texas team, they're not going to be able to just like go down 14-0 and then throw it to their number one wide receiver for a 70-yard touchdown. They don't have that guy.
No.
And now without Le'Veon Moss, you might not have the guy who can drive the ball 70 yards down the field just with his legs.
Yeah, you don't get that explosive 60, 50-yard touchdowns that you were seeing, a few weeks ago. It's not like that. But I do still think there is possibility for Marcel to get loose with his legs and to generate some big plays. Mm-hmm. I feel like that is one of the things that this offense lacks is generating those 10, 20-plus yard plays that can help rejuvenate an offense and help them just move the ball down the field. I think that's really what A&M struggles with. I think if they can, try to find those big plays, try to maybe get, something going with Terry Bussey with, his new added kind of elements to the running game. I don't know if anyone was watching in the Auburn game, but he did come into motion several times, ran the ball on the outsides, and a few inside runs as well. And I think his toughness is really something that they're going to have to lean on as a new rushing candidate. And especially since, Amari Daniels doesn't have his, side-by-side partner in Le'Veon Moss, but he does maybe have Reuben Owens, who is possible to return. Last week we were seeing him as doubtful going into the game, and then it was a game-time decision that he would not see the field. So there's also that unexpected kind of element to the game where he could provide a good second, third back outing that, obviously we're missing since E.J. Smith is having to elevate to, basically running back 2 and then Amari to number 1. So kind of moving away from Texas's defense, let's look more at Texas A&M offense. What are you seeing? What do you think that Elko needs to do in order to be successful against Texas's defense?
I think when you look at the Texas or the Texas offense with Quinn Ewers, we're not 100%. I shouldn't say Quinn Ewers because we're not 100% certain it's going to be him. He's listed as probable with an ankle injury. He got an MRI. There have been some rumblings that it could be Arch Manning, but I guess we'll assume it's going to be Quinn Ewers. He's played in every game. He's listed as probable. They are really, really good in the short passing game. They make it really easy for the quarterback, and it's going to be something where if A&M isn't getting defensive pressure just on the defensive line, they're going to struggle. Like they're going to have to rely on the guys who wanted to rely on coming into the year, right? Nick Scorton, Shamar Stewart, Shamar Turner. Like these are the guys. These are the three guys on that defense who are true difference makers. They didn't have any sacks against Auburn. That's a big deal, right? Like that's a big reason that you fell behind in that game. So if those three guys can just kind of start wrecking shop, because that's how we saw Georgia beat Texas earlier in the year, is just defensive pressure got to Quinn Ewers. It rattled him. He started turning the ball over. That's the path. That's the way that I think you have to open it up.
I agree. I think that is honestly one of the only paths to victory against this team, because Ewers, has shown that he can sit in there and pick you apart.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in his last few games, let's just see, against Kentucky, 191, against Arkansas, 176. Those aren't terribly great. He was held under 70% in completion. Not bad at all, but no interceptions.
Yeah.
He's not making as many mistakes as he was during that Georgia game.
Mm-hmm.
Since that Georgia game, he's thrown two picks.
Yeah.
And that's within the last 4 games. So he's obviously not he's not the same quarterback. He is evolving as a passer. He's getting more efficient. And he also knows how much he needs to do himself.
Mm-hmm.
He knows that he has help. He's got playmakers all around him. He's got great receivers to get the ball. He's got a decent running back group. It's not that they're it's not that they can't do it. It's just, will the mistakes hinder them?
Yeah.
That's always the biggest question, I feel like, with this team.
And you made such a good point with Quinn Ewers playing inside it, like within himself, right? Like Sark's scheme is so good at just getting guys wide open and giving quarterbacks easy answers. And what we saw against Georgia is him pressing, right? Like I can try to make this throw, and his arm talent, it's good, but it's not special. It's not elite. He doesn't have elite traits. So when he does start to push, that's when they can run into problems. And that's what I think A&M's path to victory is. If like guys like Scooby Williams in the second level, guys like Torian York, if you can create like little kind of just force him to make throws that are a little bit more difficult than he has to, try to throw it over you, try to throw it past you with some velocity, that's when mistakes are going to come. And that's when you have to capitalize on those mistakes and not kind of, no dropped interceptions is going to be a big one, right? Like if he does throw you one, you got to catch it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And going back to kind of like how he's been pressured over the last few weeks, the last time that he was sacked for more than 2 times was against Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
And that's a great kind of indicator on how Vanderbilt really got to Texas and how they pushed that game so close. It was the defensive pressure. And I think that's kind of and in the Georgia loss, he was sacked 5 times.
Yeah.
So obviously a correlation there.
Mm-hmm.
They need Scorton and obviously the rest need to do more pressure to just be there in the front. And I really think now that the secondary has kind of blossomed into fruition, I think they can do that more often now. I think that they're more comfortable doing that, especially since, they've got some great linebackers. I mean, it's not like they're just dependent on the secondary and BJ Mays and all the rest of the guys and Des Rex and
Mm-hmm.
It's just, what will we see? Will we see the same team that, obviously gave up 40-something points to Auburn, or will we see the same team that pretty much shut LSU out?
Yep.
And that just played their brand of football. Obviously Nussmeier did not have a single break that whole night.
No.
And so I think if they do that to Quinn, we're going to be hearing Kyle Field blocks down the street.
Yeah, I think you brought up a really good point at the LSU game. Is in that second half, once Elko made his adjustments, the defensive line was all over LSU against a good pair of tackles, and like the secondary being able to mix and match with the different pieces they have. They had Nussmeier flummoxed, like he didn't know where to go. So I think like what you said, if Ewers is able to just sit and just pick apart the defense underneath, they're going to really struggle. But if Elko is able to bring like these just little tweaks and little like kind of flourishes to his defensive scheme that forces Quinn Ewers to try to overcome instead of just like ride the ship, I think it's going to be – I think A&M's going to have a really good chance in this game.
I agree. And that pretty much does it for our game analysis. Let's kind of step away kind of take a step back into the overall standings, kind of talk about the playoff picture, because if no one knew, A&M does get into the SEC championship with a win this week.
Yep.
And they will be facing Georgia. Georgia's already set. They've already clinched due to a loss by Alabama. And so it's really weird this year. I know we've talked about it previously, but this year has been a crazy, unpredictable year with just everything, with the college football picture, with all the teams that are, 1 loss, 2 loss, 3 loss teams that will lose games that, last year we would have never predicted.
Yeah.
So kind of let's just go through the playoff ranking, playoff picture. I'll go ahead and say the top 12, and you're going to give me one team that you don't agree with in the top 12.
Sounds good.
And then give me a little bit of reasoning. So starting off, we've got Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame, Miami, Georgia, Tennessee, SMU, Indiana, Boise State, and Clemson. Matthias, what are your thoughts?
I'm going to say 2 because I feel pretty strongly about these 2. Number 6, Penn State. How many more times do we need to see Penn State play down to the absolute wire against a subpar team before we start to really question their validity as a top 6 team, like the 6th seed? I mean, they played Bowling Green. That came down to the wire. Minnesota last week. I mean, they're sweating that one out all the way. And, I mean, Drew Aller is playing football, I guess. Like, it's not at the highest level, but he's out there.
He's doing his thing.
He's doing his thing. But then, we look at the game against Ohio State. They kept it close, but they never felt like they were taking it to Ohio State. I don't really know what other than just them being ranked high this whole time. And, I mean, their record's great. And then Notre Dame is the other one. Just, you don't play in a conference. You lose to NIU at home. You have one good game against Texas A&M in week 1, Texas A&M against Connor Wigman. It's been a really long time since they've made an impact win. I guess they played Army last week. Army was pretty good, but
it's also, Army that you can make comments about their conference as well.
Exactly.
It's not the same.
Exactly.
And I agree full-heartedly.
So there's just a few of those teams that feel like, and I know SEC bias is going to come out here, but like Ole Miss and Alabama are both beating Notre Dame. Like, I feel pretty confident about that. Like, Indiana is another one where Indiana's really good. They're 11-1 now.
Mm-hmm.
Are we sure Indiana's beating Alabama? Because I'm not believing that for a second.
No, right? Especially after last week, I wouldn't agree with that at all. I mean,
yeah. They
honestly,
were outclassed by Ohio State last week.
Yeah. No, it was. And it kind of showed how big that gap is between, an Ohio State and a team like Indiana who has played a seemingly, perfect season regardless of the one loss. But you can't really back up their whole resume. No. And I get it. And honestly, in my opinion, I agree. I think Penn State is my one pick because like you said, the brand of the team is just not there. It's just they have never performed well against ranked teams. They don't have any kind of really like any statistics or anything that jumps out at me that says, oh, this screams like it's a great football program. So I agree, but unfortunately they do have the conference bias, and they will win. I think they'll win their conference. I don't even know who they're going to end up playing. But
it's the biggest debate in college football right now. Is a 1-loss Big Ten team or a 1-loss Big 12 team better than a 3-loss SEC team?
Exactly.
And frankly, probably if you just put it on a neutral field and you lined up 2 of those teams against each other, an SEC team is probably going to be favored the majority of the time. But you do have to look at the resume, and an Ole Miss team that loses to unranked Florida, and dead man walking Billy Napier, it's natural to say okay, sure, the SMU probably deserves to go in. I know they're ACC, but I guess they're more deserving. It's really hard. It's a weird year for the college football playoff to be having its first year in this 12-team format because this season has been so chaotic and there's been so many upsets.
Yeah, I mean, imagine how probably more easy it would have been to try last year.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, you could have had your clear-cut 10 at least and then your 11 and 12 are a little bit of a toss-up.
I mean, just
know?
last week we were talking about, is there a chance that the Big 12 doesn't get an auto bid because like AAC would get in ahead, which, I mean, that's not going to happen now with Tulane losing, but just the fact that was even a possibility just kind of goes to show how crazy this season was.
And it goes to show that the SEC championship winner may be having to play, against a team who didn't make the SEC championship. Right. Like there is that possibility too of you could have a team like Tennessee or Texas not end up going to the SEC championship but still get in the playoffs.
Right, and it's interesting because I don't think if A&M beats Texas and they make the SEC championship and then they lose to Georgia, that puts them at 4 losses. I don't think they'll get in with 4 losses.
And I think Texas gets in regardless of the fact that they lost. I
agree.
And it kind of just shapes out like that because of, like you said, the schedule. I mean, it's just very, very up in the air, and I agree. Let's talk a little bit about the chaotic Big 12, and then we'll get out of here. But, God, just to kind of put a little summary on it, there are currently 6 teams in the vying for the championship of the Big 12. And 4 of those have the same record.
Yeah.
You've got Colorado sitting at 7-2, supposedly in, but we'll see.
They need a few results to go their way.
They do. They need an Arizona State loss, who's sitting right below them, and then a BYU has to win out, of course, and then hope that both Arizona State and Iowa State lose in order for them to get in.
And that's a brutal collapse from BYU. I mean, we were talking about just they were undefeated. They were in taking it to teams.
By far the best looking Big 12 team throughout the weeks, in my opinion. They were in the driver's
seat the entire season, and then now just 2 games and they're done. I mean, you're looking at Arizona State as the favorite to make it, which is crazy.
And Arizona State, I do believe, started off with, I'm pretty sure, So they started off 3-0, had a little hiccup against Texas Tech, and then 2 weeks later had a hiccup against Cincinnati. So I think the fact that their losses are to some of the bottom teams, it really just helps them. And that's the only difference between Arizona State's record and BYU's.
Yep.
BYU lost to decent teams. Mm-hmm. So it's really a toss up. And honestly, out of all these teams that sit in the Big 12, which do you think would actually have a chance in the college football playoff?
I think Colorado to me is the one, just because if you line up all the quarterbacks in a row in the college football playoff, Shedeur Sanders is one of the best 2 or 3 in my opinion.
Absolutely.
So we're not even going to mention Travis Hunter, who's a top 2 Heisman candidate. Like, they have the top end talent to compete. BYU was really good. Like, I still think that they could be a berserker if they get into that into the playoff, just because their defense is really opportunistic and they have an offense that is pretty consistently moves the ball. So I think Colorado's the most fun one, just because you get the Deion Sanders experience, you get Shedeur in the playoff, but I think BYU would be pretty dominant too.
I agree. I'm gonna take a little bit of a side note. I actually want to say Arizona State, just because of the whole playing from down.
Yeah.
The whole underdog mentality, the whole fact of they weren't in this picture 4 weeks ago.
4-game win streak, they're red hot.
Exactly. That's my, justification for wanting them in the playoff picture. But that's about all we have time for today. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you tomorrow for UT. Thanks, and gig 'em.